This video is going to address kind of where MMA is at this point in time, with Affliction having gone downhill and folding. Not so much about literally Affliction, because honestly, you guys know about as much as I do from other people who've done a fantastic job covering this. Look at Divine Massacre, Miss 2003K, Phantom UFC fan, MacTube. These guys have all done, and others have done a good job of covering this, and you know, I think it's been covered. I don't have anything additionally to add. But we now have a situation in MMA that is a bit new to us. It's kind of similar to when Pride was bought by the UFC, in which we have one big MMA competition or promotion, which is the UFC, because Affliction was its main competition, much like Pride was. And so they kind of have a monopoly. I mean, there's people in there, there's Dream, there's Strikeforce, but Strikeforce has survived so long by not competing with the UFC, and Dream is, it doesn't have the American audience or really the money to fully challenge the UFC. But let's have a look at how this could play out, and just my thoughts on it. Now, the good side of having you know, UFC be the big thing is that, you know, in theory, they could sign all the big name fighters and put on the dream fights that we really want to see, and they had that chance when Pride went under. Let's look what they did. They brought in some big names, of course: Nogueira, Dan Henderson, Ronaldo Silva, Shogun. They had brought in Crow Cop and Verdum ahead of time, but at the same time, they botched it a lot. It's a well-documented fact of Hellboy Hansen. It was either Kawajiri or Ishida. They were on contracts with Pride to fight for what roughly worked out to 30,000 American, and then 30,000 American to win, which is, you know, the typical way that an MMA contract works. I mean, for example, Clay Guida, when he came in, was a $5,000 to fight, $5,000 to win guy. And the UFC said, you know, you have some time left on. It may have just been like one fight, or, you know, it may. I think actually with I think it was Ishida. There probably was a lot of time, because Ishida was, you know, a big star with the Pride organization, being Japanese and being one of their golden boys, so to speak, kind of like the GSPs, the Mahis, etc. Hellboys may have been somewhat short. I don't really know the exact details. But at the same time, the UFC said, we're going to cut that down to $15K to fight and $15K to win. And they basically said, no, we're not going to do that. And they held them on contract until their time contracts ran out, and prevented them from fighting MMA. Although Hellboy Hansen did some Kyoshin karate in Norway. And we see it, and of course there's the Fedor debacle, which is not the UFC's fault. It's that Divine Massacre points out a lot of good things in his video in regards to that, because, you know, he basically says that, you know, you can't make an exception for one fighter, you can't cater to one fighter, and this is entirely true. The UFC's painted its way. I don't think what the UFC's policy is correct, but at the same time, you don't change it for one fighter and one fighter only. So, you know, you don't do that. I will say, however, that Dana White fulfills the definition of Eddie Kingston insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, and expecting a different result, and that with the Fedor negotiations, which is go in, offer more money, even though it's not the money. You know, I agree with, you know, a lot of people. There's a price tag for everyone, but I don't want to see Fedor's price tag in zeros. That's a lot of digits, I'm going to say. Because, you know, Sambo is the Russian sport. It means a lot to him. He wants to be able to do that while fighting in the UFC. He wants to have a little bit of freedom, and the UFC's not going to give it to him. And they really shouldn't. But at the same time, you know, people who believe Dana White has like this great plan to, you know, bring Fedor in, I'm sorry, it's just not really going to happen. But basically, where was I? So, what are the cons of a monopoly, so to speak, as well? We look at some of the fighters that were under Affliction contract, and you know, some of them may sign with the UFC. There's a lot of talk of Vitor Belfort. But let's look at a guy like Gegard Mousasi. do we see him fight regularly anymore? I mean, he might fight Dream, but he probably won't like the UFC's exclusive contracts. He's not been an exclusive guy. Do we get to see him in the big fights? Do we get to see Bob Sobral? Although he'll probably go back to Strikeforce, but still. But no, even if he goes back to Strikeforce, we won't see him in big belts because they don't have. Their other big name is Bobby Southworth, and that's just, we've seen the fight and it was god awful. So we won't see Bob Lou in the big fights because UFC won't sign him. Other guys like Gomi and so on. I mean, Gomi we'll probably see go back to Japan, but in a mainstream type audience setting, will we see these guys fight? And the answer is probably no, at least not against good competition. And that's the downside of Affliction going under. And of course it's a downside because Affliction was driving up fighter earnings, which I don't think anyone can disagree with me on this. That was a good thing, because despite what the UFC likes to say, that we treat our fighters well and everything, you look at the payout, and maybe, whatever, if they get something under the table, they get something under the table, but, until you're going to make that, public knowledge, you have no proof of it. And you look at what they make, and I mean, a lot of them make good money. It's the golden boys of the UFC, or a couple of the old Pride guys who they had to offer substantial money to get, make a lot of good money. But a guy like, let's throw out Tamden McCrory, probably doesn't make a lot of money. They make very little money. And you think about it, being an MMA fighter at UFC level requires more or less it is really a full-time job. I mean, we've seen guys who work other jobs and what happens to them. I mean, a good example is John Colossi from The Ultimate Fighter, Matt Serra versus Matt Hughes. You looked at him, he's a pretty decent fighter, and he has some decent wins, but at the same time he's working another job, he's not training full-time, and he got beat senseless by Mac Danzig and by Matt Arroyo. Well, not beat senseless, but submitted him easily. That illustrates the point that you really do have to concentrate on MMA full-time, and let's say you even fight 4 times a year and you're getting paid $3,000 to fight, $3,000 to win, because I've seen that. I think that's the lowest I've seen a UFC contract before. You have successfully made, if you won all 4 of those fights, fought 4 times a year, you have made, okay, you've done okay, really, 24 grand. But that doesn't count, training fees, that doesn't count usual taxes, that doesn't count medical bills. And we've seen in the past, UFC will not cover medical bills unless you fight, unless you're a poster boy. Kevin Burns is the great example of that, because of course he had the broken hand when he fought Anthony Johnson, could not form a fist, and poked Anthony Johnson in the eye, which right there, that fight should never have happened. They should have given Kevin Burns the cash to get his hand fixed, cancel the fight, and that's it. But they wouldn't do that. And this is going to center a little bit on Dana White at this point, but this means Dana White's going to think that he has once again won, and he has shown in the past that he doesn't really learn from his mistakes, and this is going to slow it. I mean, give Dana White all the props in the world. He's done a lot for the sport of MMA. He is a key reason why MMA is where it is today. This is not denied. I've never tried denying this. At the same time, I think people who think he is the sole savior of MMA are on the pipe. And I think at the same time, he is now becoming a hindrance to MMA. He was great for getting the casual fan in with his, F-bomb dropping mentality and just the kind of persona he portrays, and it worked. But it doesn't work now that you're looking for legitimacy, a place up there beside the big sports. Like, he talks about being bigger worldwide than soccer. But, you're not going to get that with Dana White. I think in the end, Dana adds to the whole idea that this is a barroom sport and that it should not be respected as anything more. And you get that from a lot of people. I don't know what the solution is there, because Dana does do a lot of good things, but he does a lot of bad things, and I think people kind of got to realize that the death of Affliction, it could make things worse. Anyways, that's all I have to say for now.